careful watch of my brother's souls. And if the sky should fill with fire and smoke, keep watching over Durin Sons.
Hello Internet, my name is Kiri and you're watching Curiosity, the vlog where we get a little nerdy on geek culture. The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, is now available in US theaters. And I know the Hobbit movies haven't been true to the book, and even the Tolkien family isn't super psyched about Peter Jackson's interpretations. However, I've really enjoyed these alternative portrayals of the stories. Little disclaimer here, I grew up reading The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and pronunciations have been burned into my brain purely based on what I read in my head over and over and over again. So if you find that I'm pronouncing something in a way that you don't agree with, it's really hard to break a reading habit like that. There are still so many words that I've only read and never spoken out loud, and I'm pretty sure I'm mispronouncing them. It's also important to remember that Peter Jackson's The Hobbit isn't so much a Hobbit as it is a prequel to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And Jackson certainly isn't the first person to change The Hobbit to better fit the Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit, as you probably know, was written first in 1937, and it was written with a more light-hearted voice, completely from Bilbo's point of view, and was actually intended towards a younger audience. However, when Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings, he actually went back and altered a few things in The Hobbit to make it a more cohesive story overall. Most notably, in the original version of the book, Gollum willingly bet the ring, and Bilbo won it as a prize. The original telling does still sort of live on in one of Bilbo's lies in the book, actually. And on that note, before we stampede off to the movie theater, I wanted to share 5 random facts that I find particularly amusing or just plain awesome about the source material. Number 5. Obviously not completely accurate to the source material, The Hobbit movies actually seems to follow the story of the quest of Erebor. This story was actually published after Tolkien's death by his son in the Unfinished Tales. You can find a much shorter version of it in the appendices of The Lord of the Rings under Durin's Folk. It's in this story actually that Gandalf explains why he chose Bilbo in the first place to join Thorin's expedition. After eating a lot of dwarves in his time, Smaug was a bit of a connoisseur when it came to them, and would have recognized a dwarf instantly by his smell. However, hobbits, who seldom ever left the Shire, would have been unidentifiable. Number 4. It's fairly well known that Tolkien's work was heavily influenced by Nordic mythology. In fact, a collection of Old Norse poetry, which roughly translates to Catalogue of Dwarves, is where he got most of his dwarf names and Gandalf's. In Norse mythology, Gandalf is a dwarf who is a magical protective spirit. Tolkien's also mentioned Gandalf's relation to Odin, the Wanderer, who is depicted as an old man with a long beard and a staff and is all about truth and knowledge. I understand that could be more descriptive, but I'm not Dael Kingsmill, and you should check out her vlogs if you want to talk about mythology. Other characters who owe their names to this one collection of Norse mythology: Durin, Thorin, Thrains, and Thrors, and like 9 of Thorin's company. Funny story, in Tolkien's first draft, Gandalf was actually going to be named Bledorthin. Really? Bledorthin sounds like a bladder infection, or something you take for a bladder infection. And oddly enough, Thorin was going to be called Gandalf. Number 3. So this one isn't in any way important or plot related, but I just kind of find it a little bit funny. So, Legolas, right? He's become fairly iconic, especially those long, white, blonde locks of his. Even do a little doodle of him, people who don't even really watch Lord of the Rings recognize who that guy is. Except, not once in the like 1,000+ pages of story that he appears in is his hair color ever mentioned. Not once. And in fact, Sindarin elves, I believe, are multiple times referenced in the Legendarium as having dark hair. But, you know, his dad was blonde, and now I'm starting to think about how genetics works in Middle-earth. And what I find particularly interesting about this is Tolkien was a bit excessive with his descriptions, but Legolas is strangely lacking in this regard, which honestly just invokes the question, is he ginger? Number 2. Tolkien was a huge language nerd, and he actually created Middle-earth as a sort of background history for languages he'd already created, which for some writers is probably kind of backwards. Number 1. If you've watched one of the first Curiosities, I talked about how Tolkien sort of created Middle-earth as kind of way of going, England doesn't have any cool mythology like the Norse, I'm gonna make mythology up myself. So according to Tolkien, Arda, or Middle-earth as it's more commonly known, is actually not a fantasy land. Related linguistically to the Germanic words for earth, Arda is actually supposed to be our Earth, many, many, many years ago. So the entire Legendarium is actually supposed to be a prehistory rather than fantastical events that happen in a completely different world. Which means I was pretty much born way too many ages too late. Thanks, Mom. Obviously, there's a lot more source material that's not covered in the movies, so I would like to invite all of you to share your favorite book facts. Oh, and remember how I mentioned that whole thing about mythology, and if you're into that, you should go check out Dael's vlog? You should go check out Dael's vlog, like right now, because she's amazing and fantastic, and she tells myths in her own special, fantastic, and hilarious way. You should also check out my personal channel for more music and musings, like the full version of that song I teased you with at the very beginning of this vlog. Like and subscribe if there be orcs nearby, and until next time, stay curious.